The first man died quietly. They held him down on the coral, 3 pairs of hands pinning his arms and legs, and another man, a merchant's clerk who'd never killed anything larger than a chicken, brought the rock down on his skull, again and again, until the sound changed from a wet crack to a dull thud, like pounding meat on a butcher's block. They didn't bury him. The coral was too hard to dig. They just dragged the body to the edge of the reef and let the tide take it. By the time Jeronimus Cornelisz was done, there would be 125 more. This is the story of the Batavia, a Dutch East India Company treasure ship that struck a reef in the middle of the Indian Ocean and became the setting for one of history's most depraved experiments in human nature. It's about what happens when you strip away law, remove God, and leave men alone on a desert island with nothing but their worst instincts and a psychopath in charge. But before the blood, there was greed. The Batavia left the port of Texel in October 1628, her holds stuffed with trade goods, silver coins, and 12 chests of freshly minted currency bound for the Dutch colonies in the East Indies. She was a floating fortress, 180 feet of oak and iron, armed with 24 cannons, carrying 341 souls. Merchants, soldiers, sailors, women, children. A cross-section of Dutch colonial ambition packed into a wooden hull like salted herring in a barrel. Among them was Francisco Pelsart, the ship's commandeur. A career company man, competent, bookish, prone to seasickness. He kept to his cabin, nursing his ulcers and counting the days until landfall. And there was Arjen Jacobs, the ship's captain, a drunk, a bully, a man who treated the Batavia like his personal kingdom and her passengers like subjects who owed him tribute. He spent his nights in the lower decks, drinking stolen wine and picking fights with anyone stupid enough to look at him wrong. But the most dangerous man aboard wasn't the drunk or the bureaucrat. It was the passenger in cabin 7, Jeronimus Cornelisz, undermerchant of the VOC. 30 years old, well-dressed, well-spoken. A member of a heretical religious sect called the Torturans, who believed that sin was an illusion, that morality was a cage, and that the enlightened man could do whatever he pleased without consequence. He had the charisma of a preacher and the eyes of a man who'd already decided you were worthless. Somewhere between Texel and the Cape of Good Hope, Cornelisz and Jacobs hatched a plan. They would seize the Batavia, murder Pelsart, sail the ship to a remote island, offload the treasure, scuttle the hull, and disappear into the criminal underworld of the East Indies as wealthy men. It was a good plan, but the reef at Houtman Abrolhos got there first. The sound of a ship breaking apart is unlike anything else. It's not a crash. It's a vibration that travels through every plank and beam, a groaning shudder as the hull flexes against forces it was never designed to withstand. Then comes the crack, sharp and final, like the snapping of a giant's spine. It happened at 4 in the morning on June 4th, 1629. The lookout didn't see the reef. There was no moon, and the water in the Houtman Abrolhos is the same treacherous blue-green as the sky just before dawn. By the time the coral scraped the keel, it was already too late. The Batavia lurched, cargo slid. Cannons broke free from their lashings and rolled like bowling balls, crushing anything in their path. In the pitch-black lower decks, passengers woke to the smell of seawater and the sound of their own screaming. The ship didn't sink. Not right away. She was impaled on the reef like a bug on a pin, her back broken, her bow pointing at the stars. Water poured in through the shattered hull, but the coral held her upright. For now. As the sun rose, the survivors stumbled onto the deck and saw the problem. Land, tiny islands of coral and rock scattered across the horizon like broken teeth. The nearest was maybe a mile away. The sea between the wreck and the islands was a churning maze of razor-sharp coral heads just below the surface. Swim, and you'd be shredded. Stay on the ship, and you'd drown when she finally slipped off the reef. Pelsart took charge. Boats were lowered. The healthiest men were sent to the nearest island to search for water. Women and children went next. The injured stayed aboard, praying the hull would hold. By the end of the second day, 280 people were stranded on a cluster of islands that would later be named Batavia's Graveyard. There was no water, no trees, no shade, just coral, sun, and the slow realization that rescue might never come. Imagine the place. Each island is barely 100 yards across. The ground is coral limestone, sharp enough to slice through boot leather, porous as a sponge. The sun is equatorial, relentless. It turns the coral white-hot by midday and bakes the moisture out of your skin like a kiln. There are no seabirds because there's nothing for them to eat. The only sound is the wind and the waves grinding the coral into finer and finer dust. They searched for water, dug down through the coral with their bare hands until the rock cut them to ribbons, found nothing, drank their own urine, tried to catch rainwater in sailcloth, but it didn't rain. Some of the men killed seals and drank the blood. Others boiled seaweed and choked it down, hoping it would keep them alive another day. It didn't. People started dying. The old, the sick, the children. Dehydration is a brutal way to go. Your tongue swells, your skin cracks. Your kidneys shut down and you piss blood until you can't piss at all. Then you just stop. Pelsart knew they were finished unless he found water. So he made a decision. He took the ship's longboat, loaded it with the most able-bodied sailors, and set off for the coast of Java, over 1,000 miles away, to fetch help. He told the survivors he'd be back in a month. He left Jeronimus Cornelisz in charge. You need to understand something about Cornelius. He wasn't insane. Insanity implies a break from reality, a loss of control. Cornelius was perfectly lucid. He knew exactly what he was doing. He looked at the survivors on Batavia's Graveyard and saw a problem of resource allocation. Too many mouths, not enough water. The rescue ship, if it ever came, would only have room for so many passengers. The rational thing to do, in his mind, was cull the herd. Start with the weak, the sick, the ones who wouldn't be missed. He gathered a circle of followers, hardened criminals who'd been sentenced to labor in the Indies, soldiers who enjoyed violence, men who'd follow orders as long as the orders felt like permission. He told them they were the chosen, the elect, that God had placed them on this island to test their will, and that survival belonged to those strong enough to seize it. Then he gave them a list. The killings started small. A man who complained too much. A woman who refused Cornelius's advances. They were taken to the far side of the island at night, held down, and drowned in the shallows. Their bodies were weighted with rocks and pushed into the deep water beyond the reef. No one protested, because anyone who might have protested was on the list. Then Cornelius got bolder. He sent a group of families, 45 people, including women and children, to a nearby island under the pretense of searching for water. He called them the Sick Comforters, a mocking name for people he considered useless. Once they were isolated, he sent his men after them. They killed them all. Men first, then the women. The children last. Used rocks, knives, whatever was at hand. It took hours. Some of the victims begged, others fought. It didn't matter. By the time the sun set, the island was silent except for the waves and the flies. Cornelius kept some of the women alive, for his use and the use of his men. He set up tents on the main island and kept them there like livestock. If a woman resisted, she was killed. If a man objected, he was killed. If someone looked at Cornelius the wrong way, they were added to the list. He was building a kingdom with no laws but his. And he would have succeeded except for one problem. Weba Hayes. Hayes was a soldier, a sergeant in the VOC military. Young, tough, with the kind of quiet competence that makes men follow you even when they don't know where you're going. When the Batavia wrecked, Hayes and 45 other soldiers were sent to a cluster of islands to the north, ostensibly to search for water, but really because Cornelius wanted them gone. Armed men with military training were a threat to his rule. Cornelius expected them to die. They didn't. Hayes found water. Not fresh water, but brackish seepage that collected in depressions in the coral. You had to dig for it, wait for the hole to fill, scoop it out cup by cup. It tasted like salt and dirt, but it kept you alive. Then he found food. Seals hauled out on the rocks to breed. Wallabies, small, strange-looking marsupials that no European had ever seen before. Hayes and his men learned to hunt them, built snares from salvaged rope, fashioned spears from driftwood and sharpened bone. They built a fort, not just a shelter, but a defensive position. They gathered coral blocks, each one the size of a man's torso, and stacked them into walls. The fort still stands today. You can visit it, run your hands over stones placed by men who thought they were going to die. Hayes didn't know what was happening on the other islands, but he knew Cornelius. He'd seen the way the man looked at people, like they were things to be used or discarded. And when weeks passed, and no one from the main island came to check on them, Hayes started to suspect the truth. He was right. Cornelius's first mistake was getting impatient. He needed Hayes dead because Hayes controlled the only source of water. So he sent a raiding party. 12 men in a boat, armed with swords and muskets, with orders to slaughter Hayes and his soldiers and take the island. Hayes was ready. His men had built weapons, pikes from salvaged timber, clubs from driftwood studded with nails. They'd turned the coral fort into a killing ground, with narrow choke points and overlapping fields of fire. When Cornelius's men landed, Hayes let them come, drew them in, then hit them from 3 sides. The mutineers had muskets, but muskets in 1629 were slow, inaccurate, and worthless in close quarters. Hayes's men had reach, numbers, and rage. They drove the raiders back into the sea, killed 2, captured 1, and the prisoner talked. He told Hayes everything: the murders, the women, the plan to kill anyone who wasn't part of Cornelius's inner circle. Hayes listened, stone-faced, and then made a decision. They weren't going to wait for rescue. They were going to war. Over the next 3 weeks, Cornelius sent 3 more raiding parties. Each one was larger and better armed than the last. Each one failed. Hayes's men fought like devils. They used the terrain, the coral, the tides. They built traps, dug pits, lured the mutineers into ambushes, and cut them down with homemade polearms. They captured weapons, muskets, powder. Every victory made them stronger. Cornelius was losing control. His men were starting to question him, starting to wonder if maybe the sergeant on the other island was the one they should be following. Then, on September 17th, a sail appeared on the horizon. Pelsart had returned. The ship was called the Sardam, a rescue vessel sent from Java. Pelsart had made it, somehow. Navigated over 1,000 miles of open ocean in an overloaded longboat and lived to tell the tale. Now he was back, and he had a fully armed warship. But he didn't know what he was sailing into. Cornelius saw the ship first. He knew if Pelsart reached Hayes, it was over. So he did the only thing he could. He loaded a boat with his best men, rowed out to the Sardam, and tried to take control of the narrative. He told Pelsart that Hayes and his soldiers had mutinied, that they were the killers, that Cornelius and his men had been defending the innocent survivors. Pelsart almost believed him, but Hayes was faster. He'd already sent a boat, already reached the Sardam, already told Pelsart the truth. When Cornelius climbed aboard, Pelsart was waiting with armed Marines. They clapped him in irons. The trial was swift. Pelsart had the authority of the VOC behind him, and the VOC did not tolerate mutiny. He interrogated the survivors, collected testimony, built a case. The evidence was overwhelming. Cornelisz confessed, not out of remorse, but out of pride. He admitted to the murders, explained his philosophy, told Pelsart that morality was an invention of the weak, and that he had simply done what any rational man would do. Pelsart sentenced him to death. But first, they cut off his hands. They did it on the deck of the Sardam, in front of the survivors, used a cleaver and a mallet. Cornelisz didn't scream. He watched, detached, as if it were happening to someone else. Then they hanged him from the yardarm and left his body swinging in the wind. 6 more of the ringleaders were executed the same day. The rest were flogged, branded, and shipped back to Java to face further punishment. Wiebe Hayes and his men were pardoned, rewarded. Hayes himself was promoted and given command of a garrison. He'd earned it. But the story doesn't end there. Before Pelsart left the islands, he made one final decision. 2 of the mutineers, men who'd participated in the killings but weren't deemed important enough to hang, were marooned on the Australian mainland as punishment. Their names were Jan Pelgrim and Wouter Loos. They were the first Europeans to set foot on Australia and stay. No one knows what happened to them. The Aboriginal peoples of the region have stories about strange men with pale skin who arrived from the sea, but nothing concrete. Pelgrim and Loos vanished into the interior, and history forgot them. The Batavia herself was left to rot. Over the centuries, the wreck was picked apart by salvagers, storms, and time. But pieces remain. The hull timbers, the cannons, the stone portico from the ship's stern, now sitting in a museum in Western Australia, and the fort, Hayes's fort, still standing after 400 years. So what do we learn from the Batavia? That civilization is a thin veneer. That the difference between order and chaos is about 3 days without water. That when you remove the structures that keep us human, law, community, the fear of consequence, some men become monsters and others become heroes. And there's no way to predict which is which until the moment of crisis. Jeronimus Cornelisz believed he was enlightened, that he'd seen through the illusion of morality and discovered a higher truth. But all he really discovered was that when you treat people like things, eventually they stop being people. And when that happens, you're not building a new world. You're just stacking corpses on a desert island and calling it a kingdom. Wiebe Hayes didn't have a philosophy. He had a job. Keep his men alive, protect the innocent, resist the darkness. He didn't write treatises or justify his actions. He just did the work. In the end, that's the only thing that mattered. The Batavia's story is a mirror. It shows us what we're capable of when the props are kicked out from under us. And the reflection is ugly. But it also shows us that even in the worst conditions, even on a reef in the middle of the ocean with death on every side, some people choose decency. Not because it's easy, not because it's profitable, but because it's right. If this story of madness, survival, and the thin line between civilization and savagery moved you, share it. Let others know what happened on those islands. Let them know that the Batavia wasn't just a shipwreck. It was a test, and some people passed. The fort is still there, waiting. A monument built by condemned men who refuse to die like animals. Go see it, if you ever get the chance. And remember Wiebe Hayes.